Firstly, we keep on hearing how important financing is for developing countries, in particular, given their vulnerability to climate change. From your perspective, why do you see this financing as so crucial to African countries?
Well, I think our analysis is that if we expect global temperatures to rise by about 2 degrees centigrade, that's going to have an impact on a vulnerable region like sub-Saharan Africa of 4 to 5 percentage points of GDP growth given up. That's not growth that Africa can afford to give up. That's going to slow down getting energy access to all Africans. That's going to slow down the productivity and competitiveness of African farmers. And so there's a direct impact of climate change on the ability of Africa to continue to grow.
From the World Bank's perspective then, what is your strategy with regards to provision of green financing in Africa, and what type of percentage of funding are you starting to allocate towards these projects?
Well, Africa is a very important part of our portfolio anyway as a development finance institution, and increasingly greener growth for all, so a growth which is lower in its emissions and a growth which is allowing countries to adapt to climate change is sort of mainstreamed in the way in which we look at the economy. But in addition to our ongoing work, and we, through our most concessional window, IDA, put $3.3 billion into the African economy in fiscal year 2009, we have climate investment funds, specific funds that have been set up over the last 2 to 3 years to channel climate finance to the poorest countries. And there, the climate finance investment funds have $6.5 billion already allocated. 37% of that is flowing to Africa at the moment.
We of course know that 195 countries are meeting here this week. They're trying to get a deal, a second commitment period for the Kyoto Protocol, but they're also trying to access funding from developed countries for the Green Climate Fund. The World Bank is currently the interim trustee of this. Are we likely to see some form of agreement? Are we likely to see some form of structure put to the Green Climate Fund by Friday?
I hope so. We need all forms of finance, all forms of investment to be working for a greener growth future for all countries, but in particular for poorer countries. The conversation here on the Green Climate Fund, I understand, is going quite well. We are not in that room. We, as a development finance institution, are primarily interested in implementing programs using carbon finance, using climate finance, using the Green Fund in order to make a difference for poor people, poor farmers, poor families immediately. If we are asked to be the trustee on an ongoing basis, we can do that too. But we're a development finance organisation, and we want to work in partnership with businesses and with governments to kind of innovate the way in which financing can actually make a difference in people's lives now, not in 20 years.
We talk about $100 billion being the mark that they're currently looking at to secure on an annual basis by 2020. The IEA is one of the bodies that disputes whether this is enough, given the need to invest in huge power and clean energy projects. From your perspective, do you have any ballpark point, a figure that is needed for this fund?
Well, I think we use that 100 billion figure as well. I mean, it's a good rule of thumb. 80% of that 100 billion, remember, is going to have to be mobilized from the private sector. So we're really looking at, finding 10, 20, 30 billion dollars worth of public sector finance in order to leverage the private sector to build the right kind of cities, the right kind of power plants, the right kind of forestry and agricultural businesses that are both resilient to climate change and can spur a greener growth. I actually don't think the amount of money is really an issue. The issue is finding the ways for that financing to flow to projects that make a difference.
When we're talking about financing, the big issue everyone cites is reducing the barriers to entry for the private sector and bringing down those market barriers. In Africa, there are a lot of risks when it comes to investing. There's country risk being amongst those. What are the big barriers that you see that are stopping the private sector from wanting to provide this green financing?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. One of the reasons why you need public financing to leverage private financing is that we have to de-risk the kinds of projects that need to happen. So let's say we're looking at a solar plant or a solar farm in sub-Saharan Africa. That technology is new, and so there's a technology risk. The project, because it's in Africa, may be a small project, and so those are riskier too. And then you've got currency, credit, and country risk as well. And so what we are doing is finding ways to blend finance, to bring different financiers together who have different risk appetites and find ways for them to work together in order to finance the projects that need to get built.
With this all being said, at the same time, the S&P has now put the sovereigns over in Europe on credit watch. This underscores the crisis that's taking place in Europe and really the strain that the global financial system is taking. How is this impacting the ability of developed countries and developed country businesses to provide this financing?
Well, I think we are seeing a worrying impact globally of the Eurozone crisis, and we in the World Bank Group are particularly focused on making sure that trade finance and other forms of finance that are necessary for small businesses in particular to keep going are available. But I think that when we started the COP process nearly 20 years ago, we were working within a framework of common but differentiated responsibilities, but we were also working in a world where most investment finance flowed north to south. Today in Africa, investment is coming into the country from other parts of the global south. It's coming from the east and from the west. And so all kinds of parts of the world are investing in Africa. And similarly, in the last 20 years, there's been a remarkable development of domestic capital markets too. There's a really powerful story of growth in Africa. The question now is to make that green growth that works for all.
You talk about financing coming from perhaps the east, as you might be alluding to. So if I'm reading you correctly, if we do have a recession in Europe, is this going to have a huge impact on financing, or will green financing still continue to flow from the east to African countries?
Well, I think that you see constraints over traditional development finance from OECD countries as they experience a period of flat growth. And those traditional aid dollars are very important, but they're not sufficient anymore. And so we need to leverage foreign direct investment. We need to leverage pension funds and other institutional investors, not just from Europe, but from the Arab world, from East Asia and from Latin America. And then we need to also mobilize domestically. When we look at climate and the challenge of funding a different path forward for growth, we're really looking at a pie chart of all of those different pieces of finance coming together.